Welcome, everybody, to Learn with Lowell. Today, we're joined with Bre Duffy. She is the New Harvest Director of Responsible Research and Innovation in the U.S. and directs the New Harvest Fellowship Program. The last person we had on who had that title was Kate Kruger, so this should be fun to hear
Yes.
about Bre and her life. But Bre, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, I sometimes describe that I am 1/3 of the new Kate. Uh, so it's a fun
Yeah.
job. She started the program really, really well.
Do you want to grow into a full Kate, like get the next 2/3,
Well,
or what's the
she
plan?
did so much. I don't know how she did it, but there's now 3 of us directors, just because our work has grown so much. So
Okay, so you need 3 now to fill one Kate.
yeah, it's incredible. I don't know how she did it herself.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're like you leave 3 cells alone. If like the objective is to slowly eat the other 2 and become like the Omni Kate.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah. But anyway, so on your Twitter, around the time that there was an announcement for the new cultured cell-based chicken when it was coming out, you wrote that the headlines where people were writing about them were quite cringeworthy. And as someone who's a scientist who's in this space, I'm always curious what cringeworthy means in terms of your perspective, who has that wealth of knowledge, and then we can go into there from there. But what were some of the headlines that you thought were misleading?
Ooh, starting off strong. I love it. So I mean, I'll start by saying it is definitely exciting news. And I do remember at the time when I posted that on Twitter was when the FDA had
Hmm.
given their letter of no further questions, had not gone to the USDA yet. And so my frustrations that led to that tweet really revolved around the number. I mean, it was probably like 90 to 95% of headlines coming out were cultured meat gets regulatory approval and cultured meat's going to be on your doorstep tomorrow. Like those kinds of things that didn't get at the nuance of the regulatory process, which again, I don't think everyone needs to understand the nuance, but in truth, it was not regulatory approved yet. It still had many more steps it needed to do. I mean, simply needing to go to the USDA because the way these products are regulated is a 2-step process between the 2 agencies. And so that tweet came from my frustrations at the number of headlines that were just saying it had the green light, it was approved already, when that really wasn't true.
Hmm. Are there so for every other company, are they going to have to go through a similar regulatory, or are they spearheading anything in what they're doing?
I mean, certainly those first couple of companies are spearheading. But yes, every other company is going to have to go through the same process. The regulatory process in the US for these products, at least at this moment, is really interesting in that it is completely joint. That's not like just a first time thing. That is how it's going to be. That was agreed upon between the 2 agencies back in 2019, I believe. And that's really because of the way the US regulates similar products now. Like the FDA is the one that regulates pharmaceutical development, which looks a lot like early stages of these products. I mean, it's cell culture, it's laboratory practices. All of that really falls under the FDA's jurisdiction. But food, animal products, and processing of meat all happens in the USDA. So they've agreed to kind of have this handoff in regulatory approval where the FDA looks at those early stages that they're experts in regulating, and then hand it off to the USDA that regulates the later stages that they're experts in. Interestingly, I think we're the only country doing that right now. I haven't really looked into it enough to understand why that is, but I understand why it exists in the US at least. And something really interesting, like to get to your point where you asked, are they spearheading it? The process right now, because these products are kind of unprecedented. Like, yes, there are a lot of pieces you can pull from previous technologies when looking at the regulations, but a product just like this doesn't exist before this. And so regulatory agencies don't have standards yet around how to regulate them. There's no clear checklist of here are the things you need to test, here are the things you need to show, and you'll get regulatory approval. It's all kind of ad hoc right now. Companies show the data they think proves their product is safe. Regulators look at that, decide if they agree, maybe ask for some revisions, ask for additional tests. It's all very ad hoc, very flexible, which is good because regulators recognize if they made it more rigid, it would probably hamper innovation. But it's also a lot of work. We've spent the last year talking to a lot of regulators around the world about this process, and that was one of the big outcomes is we need standardization, we need some better processes and solidify the testing methods to use, but we're just not there yet.
Have we used that process of the FDA USDA handoff for any other thing that has come out like this. I'm thinking of like genetic engineering or CRISPR when they've had new foods coming out. I don't remember anything like it, but I don't know.
That's a great question. I don't know of any, but I'm gonna have to look into that. As
Yeah,
far as I'm aware, this is the first, but that's probably not true. I'm definitely after this gonna look into that.
yeah. And then what would be a better standard for companies in the US that you see? Like, so if right now it's quite cumbersome for new people to get in the scene and then build something that's safe up to code and then bring it out to market, what would be the new standard that you think people should be using? Well, like the FDA, USDA.
Well, it's not so much as one individual new standard. I think
Hmm.
we need to slowly work towards standards in kind of all aspects of the technology. But I think what we need to get there is more collaboration and sharing amongst the industry, because right now every company is internally in secret having to try to figure out what safety data do they need to show to prove that their products are safe, and talking to regulators about that individually. And so what we propose is that if we were to do that more openly across the whole industry, we could develop some standards that everyone could follow, everyone could work towards and put data towards, so that this whole process could be streamlined and move a lot faster. It's always slower when you have a bunch of actors working on the same problem at the same time in secret.
Yeah. It sounds like it would be a competitive advantage for the people who've been in this space for 4, 5, 10 years that have been working on something to not help with that new standardization, because then new companies would rise up and take their market, like, potentially catch up, if not exceed them.
Yeah, I do think that is true, and it's kind of one of the fundamental challenges with American capitalism, or capitalism generally, is you are de-incentivized from doing those kinds of things that could lift the whole industry up. So getting around that is challenging. I mean, there certainly would still be benefits for those companies. I mean, every new product they put out, they're going to have to develop these processes around. But you're right; it definitely de-incentivizes the more established companies from working together.
There's a great nonprofit called SENS, SF. They're in a number of places now, but they work on longevity related things. And when they develop IP in house and they're licensing out to help promote the industry, kind of what you guys do with like fellowships, not quite, but like similar to what you guys do with fellowships and what have you. But when they do that, they also negotiate like an equity stake and like usually some component of like a board share or whatever. So there's some level of control to make sure that the IP goes through to the standard that they think is right. I've often felt like I wonder what would be like if New Harvest had some hand like that. So while because I think New Harvest has been a huge part of raising cell agriculture to be something that could even be doable now. I think if you deleted New Harvest from existence, I don't think the industry would be where it is today. And so I wonder if they had a little bit more of an influencing hand, they versus like, hey, guys, I really think you should be doing this. It would be, hey, we're on your board where we have equity stake, and we think this would be something that raises the tide for you and for everyone else who's coming with it. Have you, I don't know, in house or whatever? What do you think about such an idea?
So you're saying have like a board or equity stake in some of the startup companies?
Yeah. So you guys, there's like open source technology that you guys develop. For the licensing of the source, you would just take like a stake or board or something like that, so that or a part of accepting the license is the sharing of data, like some setup like that.
Oh yeah, so for the research that we fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's a complex question, because there's a lot of forces at work in the research in this industry right now. But you're right, New Harvest really does push for open research and open licensing. And the reason for that is it's manifold, but I think New Harvest niche is really trying to focus on basic research, the kind of basic fundamental knowledge that is lacking in this field. I mean, it exists obviously within startup companies, but because of the way that the field emerged, which was primarily funded by VCs towards startups for the early stages, there's a lot more knowledge in those companies behind closed doors. There's very little in the public domain, and that's backwards from how most industries develop. You see a lot of funding the public sector first, and a lot of open knowledge and foundational knowledge in the field, a lot of discourse across scientists to kind of get that foundational understanding that then startup companies build upon. that doesn't exist in this field, or at least it didn't, and we're certainly starting to see it now. So I think one reason why that model doesn't really make sense for New Harvest is that that type of basic research doesn't lend itself to a startup company and equity stake and licensing. Like, that's not the point of it. The point of that research is to get that foundational knowledge out there that others can build upon. And eventually, with enough building upon it, someone will come up with something marketable and commercializable. But that's not the goal of the type of research we're focusing on. And that's not to say we wouldn't ever be interested in focusing on that type of research. I think the model you're talking about is a model that we would be interested in if we had the funding to develop that sort of operational support within New Harvest. Technology transfer offices are an enormous undertaking for universities if you just look at that. So kind of building that type of operational capacity within New Harvest is absolutely something I think we would be interested in doing, but isn't where we're at now because we feel like that foundational research is the most neglected piece.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it has been a big component of what you guys do. I think when I look at a lot of the cell ag related technologies, well, like startups and stuff, if you look at the scientists, you can just you can see them all come from you guys. Like I once joked with Kate that she probably is trained the top scientists in all the companies everywhere, so she can just walk in anywhere she wants to go. But so I think
and that
there
was
is that
the goal. I'll say that the fellowship program has two main goals. One is the one I talked about, that foundational research piece that's really neglected. The other one is training and supporting the emerging leaders of the field, because there's kind of two bottlenecks in the field right now. One is open knowledge and foundational understanding of the science, and the other one is talent. So we kind of try to do both of those, and I'm happy to hear that you think we've done well on the talent piece, because I think so too.
Well, if you're interested in this space, if you go on Twitter and you follow some of these people, they're also the ones who are more socially more open about what they're doing. They're doing a lot of different things. So it's you got them when they're young and you train them up in the right way, versus people who are if they're 20 years in the industry and then you're sharing some of these philosophies, they've already had 20 years of bottleneck thinking that kind of gets in the way.
Totally. I think openness it's such a broad concept. A lot of people just think of it in the terms of open publishing or open licensing, which is also incredibly important. But there's, like you're saying, openness in how we communicate as scientists is also really important. And that is something we try to foster in the students we fund, because I think it leads to better discourse in the field. And that in turn leads to better innovation.
Yeah. So one thing that we're kind of touching on, and that is a general concern. I think many people have had a relationship where they offer all this help, and then something happens and they're like, hey, I could use some help back, and then that person's nowhere to be found, right? And it kind of feels that way to some extent when I'm hearing about people being intransigent with wanting to share safety data and stuff. Granted, it advances them, but for you guys, for advancing the field, it's very hurtful. And so how do you think about getting around that? And it's interesting as a theme. I think people listening in, even though they're not into who it could be, I think they've experienced that. Where they're very nice to someone, and then they're who are you when you need the help back, which is sharing safety data. So what's the strategy to get around that?
It's a great question. If I knew the silver bullet to that, I don't think we'd be in this situation we're in now. I will say that there are lots of companies that want to be more open. So we talk to companies and they see the benefits of this. They see how, for example, New Harvest, but also the wider academic and open science community has helped them out, and they want to give back. But there's a lot of, as I said before, different pressures in this system. And so some of them have described it as feeling like a prisoner's dilemma. They want to be more open, but they don't want to be the first one because it's going to hurt them a lot, like you're saying. And they have pressure from their investors to not do that because some of this very basic IP is still looked at in the field as being incredibly valuable. So there is a willingness. There's maybe just not clear steps for how to do it. And so that's some of the work New Harvest is actually trying to do right now, is figure out what does that look like. So we have the Cultured Meat Safety Initiative, which we just wrapped up phase 2 on now. And that's the work I was alluding to earlier, where we spoke with regulators over the last year. And the next phase of this, we've now spoken to industry. That was that first safety publication we did in 2020. We've now spoken to the regulators about what the bottlenecks for them. Next, we want to bring all of these people together and talk about the nitty-gritty details of, okay, if we all want to share and we all see the value of this, how do we do it? Like, what protections around IP need to be taken into consideration? If you were to join a consortia to have more open sharing, what would you want that to look like? What types of frameworks and guardrails would you want to have in place to ensure you felt comfortable sharing your data? What kind of models do the regulators want to see to ensure the data that's being shared is actually useful to them? Like, all of these kind of nitty-gritty pieces are, I don't think anyone knows right now. There are plenty of models in other industries. Pharmaceuticals, GMOs are another example where they have done some of this work. And so we're looking to those examples of how these types of consortia or data sharing initiatives have formed. And we want to try to work with the stakeholders in this field to develop something that would work for them. And that might look different in different kind of groups. So we may have, it's probably not going to be one giant international consortia, probably unrealistic, but you might get a small group of stakeholders together that are willing to work on an individual problem. And we're going to have to work out the kind of frameworks and guardrails that will work for them. So that's the current idea. We're just starting that work now. But I'm really excited about where it could lead.
Is there a number? It's like a critical mass number that you guys need to meet for that to work, just on a theoretical level?
Number
a number of like group startups like pooling their data for that to work?
It's a really great question. I'm not sure. And I imagine we could look to some of those other industries I talked about to see what they've found to be useful. But I think any number is going to be good, honestly. Even if you just got 2 to start sharing and then that slowly grew into 3, 4. Yeah, I'm not sure what the number would be. I'll have to kind of think about that a little bit more in our work.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to make it so the FDA or USDA could incentivize people with open sharing so that if you share your data so they can make better regulation, you get priority approval, like you get like front of the line or like some type of like, thing like that. That way, in sharing it, you're not like someone new can't just come in and take that data and run ahead. So they could still have the timing element. So they get like time and money are like the 2 things that people worry about.
Yeah, wow, it's a great idea. I'd love it if FDA would incentivize that.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, how would we do stuff like that? Like, how would we like put in a consortium or like get the FDA or USDA to be more involved in helping raise up the industry?
Well, the FDA and USDA certainly, I think, are interested in this type of work, as are all the regulatory agencies. And they do this type of thing through public-private partnerships, is often what it's called, where these agencies will work with industry and academia and create these partnerships for that mutually beneficial collaboration. So it's definitely in the realm of possibilities. I've never heard of anything such as a like front of the line pass. I think that'd be pretty interesting.
Like JLF free. You get to go to the front as long as you share the data, you meet the checks, you get to go to the front of the line. You get first dibs of the pie or whatever it is. From a utilitarian standpoint, when I look at the U.S. and like whenever there's a policy decision or anything like that, when it's in the U.S.'s benefit, I more likely see great things going that way. What benefit is it to the U.S. to have cellular agriculture advance here and be on the cutting edge here versus somewhere else, given the fact that we produce an overabundance of food and feed, I think every farmer feeds like everyone in America plus like 150 people outside of America, but that was like 15-year-old data, and most of them have retired, so that number's probably bigger. So like, what is the utilitarian value of the U.S. having these technologies?
That's a great point, and kind of makes me want to discuss other topics too, because this food insecurity problem is so much more complex than just we are not making enough food. I love that you brought that up. There are other dimensions that cell ag is not fit to solve, which is like the cold supply chains and how do we ensure food isn't wasted along that, and consumer education on food waste, all that. That's a different story. I think there are a lot of benefits in the US in terms of food security around, obviously climate change. So looking at needing to come up with solutions that reduce the climate impacts of our food. And this is a powerful tool for that. I'm not saying it's the silver bullet, but I do think it's a powerful tool that should work in conjunction with others. It also could have major benefits in biosecurity. So in theory, could be a little bit, being a closed system could be a little bit more robust in the kind of safety of it. And it will be less influenced by factors like climate change. So like I'll often say that, or I stole this from Isha, absolutely, that cultured meat is both a solution to climate change and an option for a climate changed world. So as climate change happens, which it's going to, we are seeing a higher rate of disease and death among livestock. We're seeing lower production efficiency in a lot of our crops. And so these types of things are going to force us to have to be more efficient over time. in how we produce food. So you're right. Right now, we are producing enough food. Climate impacts of it might be too high. So right there, I think this could have some benefits. But yeah, it's a complex problem for sure. And I don't know that the US needs to be the leader on this. There are a lot of countries that needed a lot more. And I mean, that's part of why Singapore has been such a major factor in the forefront of this field, is because they don't have enough land to produce enough food for their country. And so they have major initiatives within their country to invest in technologies like this that allow them to produce more food.
Yeah. What there's like so much there I want to comment on. So
I know, sorry, I'm like going in a million directions in my answers.
No, I like it. It's like a all you can eat buffet. Like you put out the table and I can choose what I want to eat. So it's really fun. So first thing is, people keep talking about climate change like it's in like, I think, the wrong tense. Like it's not, in my opinion, going to happen. It's already happening. I think it's been happening for the last like 30 years. I think that, like, for people listening in, I think there's a difference when you hear, oh, it's going to happen. It's like, oh, okay, that's a tomorrow problem. When I think people are already dying from climate change now. Like respiratory illnesses are on the rise. Like even like selfishly for people just living about the world, like climate's already changed. And you can like see that the temperature is like moving north a little bit. So I think it's the climate for a region in the U.S. is moving north at like 6 or 7 meters a year or something like that. So like it's getting higher and higher. Like it's actually kind of neat. Somewhere in Michigan is like the perfect place to live. I forget the name of it. Someone did research on this. For all the climate models, there's one place in Michigan that's going to be like the best place, and they expect everyone to immigrate there. So I just want to comment on that. Just, for everyone listening, tense, it's not going to happen. It's going to get worse. And then with I think one advantage that you alluded to, this biosecurity, is I'm often surprised how we have not had blight just wipe out the Midwest and all these different monoculture crops that we have. Because it's just, if anyone's living in the city and you've never seen this, like go on Google View and just like, I'm telling you, grab the little dude and throw it anywhere in the Midwest that's not a city, and you just look right, look left. It's corn as far as the eye can take you. Yes. It's not, I think most of it's like a feedstock. It's not actually like corn we eat as well. So
Absolutely.
It's like you have monoculture. So like if a blight or something happened there, it would then hit the cows, which then hit everyone else, and like have like this huge ripple effect. Which if you've seen Interstellar, people can get a sense of it there. But I am surprised we've never had a blight scenario like this, and so I do like this idea of cultured meat, etc., as being this nice safeguard where it could be like 10-20% of our stuff. We can export that, the surplus, or we can export those technologies and stuff like that. But I often wonder, why have we not had blights? But at the same time, I don't want to like question it too much, because I know we do.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, we do genetic engineering and stuff. Yeah.
I don't know if it technically was blight, but the Dust Bowl was to some extent an effect of that monoculture in the Midwest, right? I'm actually not a perfect historian on this, but
I would say, and people can write in and tell me how I'm wrong, but the Dust Bowl was more improper agriculture techniques. Yeah. So this actually goes to your point of having a framework where like everyone can be happy versus like people having to like knife each other for the best common denominator to make themselves money. Basically, back then, people would just like run their fields constantly, and they would deplete them, so they run more fields. And so they had from like Montana to Texas, they just had an open field, and then the wind came in and just picked it up and started like cycling, because then there was like less heat regulation and stuff like that. And then FDR came in and had like they had incentives so that if you leave your field fallow, like 1 in 4 years or 1 in 7 years, whatever it is, you get paid for it. So you still make money doing the right regenerative practices to keep your crops doing well. So but to answer the original question, in my opinion, I wouldn't say it was a blight issue. That's more like Irish potato famine in my mind. Mm-hmm. It was more of a terrible practice. And if you wanted to see an example of like where it goes if you continue doing those practices, in the Bible there's this place called the land of milk and honey, where like Moses and co go, and that is present day Iraq. And it used to be like this really lush thing, and a lot of the agriculture practices depleted the area.
Oh wow!
Because they didn't know any better. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually, I'm not the right type of scientist for this, but I think agricultural practices and regenerative agriculture is incredibly interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you did a project on something involving. Actually, I might have noted it. You did like a school project. I read everything I could have found on you. Where is it?
Oh yes, I did do a school project on regenerative agriculture.
Yes. I was going to ask you what your thoughts are on soil erosion.
Yes, yeah, that project was interesting. I mean, just to give a slight bit of my life story, I got halfway through my PhD in medicine, tissue engineering for medicine, and suddenly went, oh my God, I want to work in food, because climate change and food insecurity, and I became very concerned about all those problems. And So I took this GIS class in my last year of my PhD. While I'm finishing my PhD in biomedical engineering, I took a GIS class just to gain skills in that and did this project in regenerative agriculture. And it was super interesting. So that's about my depth of knowledge, and that was now about 4 years ago. But I do think, so if I remember correctly, the project looked at these different factors of regenerative agriculture, like no-till and cover cropping, and kind of the use of those across the US, and how we could improve the use of those. And I think factors like you were just talking about with the Dust Bowl, where we can come in, government can come in and help subsidize the farmers in changing these practices, I think would be really impactful. I'm not a policy expert, but I do think we need more solutions like that. And I think that the field of cultured meat, like I said, isn't the silver bullet. It's going to have to work with these other solutions. And so I think we need both of those to actually have a sustainable future.
Yeah. Have you read anything about the Three Sisters agriculture practice of the Native Americans?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such a great example of really smart farming, and something we've moved away from as a society as we've looked to just more industrialization and manufacturing essentially in farming.
Yeah, and for people listening in, because sometimes I like people write in, Lowell, why don't you like what versus just like saying a term. Three Sisters, I think it was corn, squash, and bean, and they would basically grow it together so that the corn would act like the structure for the other ones to grow on, but they would all take something and put something into the soil that the other one could use, and so it's very sustainable.
Yeah, the corn provided the structure for the beans to grow up, and then the squash provided the cover to cool the ground, I believe, to help keep it more moist. And then you're right, nutrient-wise, they all worked really well together. I actually, in my free time, love to do gardening. I often joke that I'm going to quit my job one day and open a farm. We'll see if I ever get there. But I think putting crops together is such an interesting scientific question of like, which nutrients do crops need, which nutrients do crops give, how can you grow them together, how can that benefit soil health? It's all really interesting science.
Yeah, the beans I think have aren't they the ones that have like ribosomes, so they put out like nitrogen or phosphorus or something in the soil, and then like recharges what corn takes from it. I don't remember it specifically, but I think there's that's why there's a cycle where people go from like corn to soybean to fallow, because the corn depletes the soil of a nutrient that I don't remember off the top of my head.
Nitrogen, I believe. I believe that legumes are nitrogen fixers.
Yeah. So then I imagine like the beans as well. Like they're really smart. They just figured all this out on their own. The people who figured out like what was poison and not poisonous, it's like that person was like really smart, or like it was like a drunk bet. It's like, I bet you to like eat this thing or whatever. Yeah. But so the past has a lot of potential for the future. But do you have any thoughts? Like honestly, and maybe not because it's like 4 years old. People keep asking me about soil erosion. When you think of regenerative practices that sustain, the U.S. has pretty good, they have okay controls on soil erosion. But do you have any thoughts on how we could do soil erosion better in the U.S. or in other places, or is that like too far afield? That's fine.
No, now you're moving to like interest fields, not what I'm actually an expert in. So I'm nervous to say anything, because you should not trust me as an expert. What I can say is I do think soil erosion is incredibly important and interesting. I do think the U.S. must have better guardrails in place compared to the Dust Bowl era, but I think we could certainly be doing better.
Yeah,
about all I can give in my non-expert opinion.
You describe yourself as similar to the Avatar from the Last Airbender series as being the bridge between academic research, its implementation industry, as well as policy that's going to regulate it. And so I'm curious, if as you being like the bridge between these three worlds, what is the result of that? So like when you do like a day of work, like and you're sitting at these three different intersections, what is the result of that work? Like what comes from it?
It's a great question. Also, I do not remember describing myself as a character from the Avatar. That feels like a big thing to claim.
No, I'm describing. Okay, so just to be clear, thank you for saying this. I am describing you as a character from the Avatar. The quote is the quote from you is the bridge between academic research, its implementation industry, as well as the policy that's going to regulate it. So it feels like the Avatar who's between two worlds.
Okay, I'm now going to take that as an enormous compliment. I love the Avatar. My car is named Appa. It's a silver Prius, and I think it's the best name for it. So I mean, that's really why I love my job, is being at that interface of all three. I think being in just one, I would probably get bored after a while. But I mean, on a day-to-day, I don't know that it changes my work too much. I mean, it does mean that I interact with a lot of different stakeholders in my day-to-day, which is pretty cool. So obviously, as director of the fellowship program, I interface with academics quite a lot, but also often interface with industry and regulators, like that initiative that I described where we've been talking with them, or that can also look like direct collaborations with organizations like the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. We did a collaboration with them over the last couple of years. That was really interesting. So yeah, it just keeps my day-to-day pretty interesting, I would say. But what that looks like I think an important component of what that looks like is it becomes really important to be a neutral, central stakeholder. And so that's part of why New Harvest doesn't have IP in any companies. I mean, I don't know, you probably know this, but New Harvest and Isha used to have equity and perfect day in every, but gave that up to ensure that we were perfectly neutral. And that's why New Harvest staff don't ever sign NDAs or confidentiality agreements, because if we did have information protected by an NDA from an individual company, that could skew how we work with other companies, or it could at least have the appearance of being biased. And so being that bridge between the different stakeholders, it becomes really important that we're very neutral. And so we really strive to be so that we can be trusted by all of these different stakeholders.
Yeah. So that you're the person who's kind of like setting up, like calling people, listening to what their stories are, what's going on in their thing. And then you kind of like synthesize it together and kind of make a plan with the rest of your team as well, I imagine. Not in a silo. And then you then you execute the plan a bit. So like putting together like the safety study, like you're probably part of that. And then the fellowships, like managing the fellowship program, I imagine is quite straightforward. You help find the people and you like mentor them and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is often a convener role, as you were saying, is kind of bringing together these people. And sometimes, like you said, we're talking to them individually and doing that kind of coalescing of information ourselves. But actually, I think it's more powerful when we do that with the different actors. And so convening them together, having everyone talk and put together that information, which we then collect and typically put out as a peer-reviewed publication. So that's why the outputs of the first two phases of the Cultured Meat Safety Initiative resulted in peer-reviewed publications that kind of collected all that information, synthesized it into a way that's useful to the field, and then published it. So that is a lot of the type of work that we do.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm a fan on conference calls as well, because you don't have to play a game of telephone. You know, Bre can just say, "Hey, this is my concern," and then it's not Lowell describing Bre's concern to a third-party person.
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Really simplifies it. Yeah.
It can be tricky sometimes. Like I will say, in the first phase of the Cultured Meat Safety Initiative, where we were talking with the industry and trying to put together that publication, which was the first ever public information on the manufacturing process at these companies, doing that without signing NDAs was a really interesting process. And so making sure that that wasn't a game of telephone where information was lost was an operational challenge, I think. And I came in, I was hired towards the end of that, so I can take no credit for it at all. But the way that Isha and the team did that was, I think, really incredible.
Yeah. I had an advisor in college that said that farmers, like people who work where someone they can grow and take care of, like he has no basis for this other than just like his anecdotal, observation, are like the most like humble, like they don't get like stressed as much. So like all your plants, all these things, that's what I'm thinking of like you can see what comes from a day's work. So I always ask people when they have a job, like how do you feel the weight of it? Like what is the outcome of it? Because there's a lot of roles in this world where you go on Monday, you leave Friday, and it's like, what did I do this week? And there's a lot of people who sit there from like 1 to 3 p.m. or something like that, pretending to be busy because their boss makes them feel that way, that they have to, and it sucks. Like there's so much of your time being wasted. So like that's why I ask these questions, because people looking in would be like, oh, what's that job like? What's the hard parts and stuff? They wouldn't know. They would just think it's like them. They don't, maybe nothing comes of it and stuff like that. But what Lisa from Sense, the other nonprofit, which I'm comparing you guys to in my head, she said like when she has had to do negotiations, like one of the interesting things that they do is when it does come down to like getting someone to sign something or not sign something, that's when you find out who's like the decision maker in a different group. And while you are at the tail end, I imagine you're working on new projects and stuff like that. What are some like cool or like interesting strategies that you've either implemented like coming into it, or that you've discovered to be working really well when you have diverse stakeholders like this? Like how do you keep everyone not only on task but willing to be on task?
It's a really great question. And I think we're going to really test this in the next phase of our work, where we're bringing together really diverse stakeholders. But I think that there is a level of trust making that has to happen with anyone that we work with. And so you can't cold call someone and assume that they understand the value proposition of what we're doing if they're going to be fully on board and want to cooperate. I think you can never assume that in any work that you're doing. So I think that oftentimes there's some relationship building that has to happen to kind of bring these stakeholders together and ensure that there is trust, not only with New Harvest, but amongst the whole group. And that takes time. So I think that none of these things can happen overnight. Both stages of the previous initiative we did started off with a lot of one-on-one calls with these different people to, yes, gain information, but also answer questions they had, gain that trust. And then we brought everyone together into a collaborative workshop. And so that's one strategy that we've used quite a lot and probably will use in the next phase of this work as well. Especially because in the next phase of the work, we're not just bringing together a bunch of industry or a bunch of regulators, we're bringing together industry and regulators and academics and policymakers. Like, we might be bringing all of these stakeholders together. So that's going to be an extreme version of it.
When you're looking at industry and the people you're talking with, is it just the new industry of cell ag, or do you look at, legacy people like dairy farmers, ranchers, and people like that to talk to?
It's a really great point. We want to do that work. We haven't done a whole lot of that yet. We have, when we've had the opportunity, tried to do outreach with conventional farmers, but I think that there needs to be a lot more of that type of work in the field. The cultured meat field likes to talk a lot about how we need to work with farmers and need to have a just transition. We were one of the people that throw those words around a lot, and no one knows how to do it best. And so we're actually hoping in the coming years to be able to focus on that more and not just do it, but actually look at the best way to do it. Like, what are the ways we can collaborate with conventional farmers, and what do those engagements look like, and what's the most productive way to do it? We have started a little bit of that work with Indigenous communities, actually, primarily in Canada. There was a workshop that we collaborated with the University of Fraser Valley on last year, where we brought together academics, industry, and Indigenous community leaders together for a workshop. And the goal of that wasn't to come out with solutions. We didn't come out with solutions or anything. It was just to open that conversation and start to talk about what it looks like to work together across these communities, what these technologies could mean for Indigenous communities and their food security and the meaning of food in their communities. Really just a conversation. So that's leading to a publication coming out soon, kind of on the learnings of that. And we're hoping to continue that work on the best ways to engage with Indigenous communities in this field to ensure just transition. So we've actually started that work a little bit in that community, hoping to do more in conventional farming communities.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm always a big fan of like more conversations with Indigenous groups. What drew you guys to them over like sitting down with like ranchers or someone else? Like what was about them that
so often it's the opportunities that come our way. If I'm being purely honest, I mean, we think both are incredibly important. We just had some opportunities through our collaborators at the university to bring this group of people together. And so it's more that those opportunities kind of arose before the other ones have, especially in the US. There is a lot of tension between this field and conventional farming communities. So I'd say it's mostly just which opportunities have arisen. We're absolutely interested in doing both and think they're both important.
Yeah, I imagine from Indigenous Americans, one of the bigger concerns would be malnourishment. But what were some of the things? I mean, I guess there'd be like a teaser for the larger, paper. But what were some of the things that they were concerned about?
Yeah, so I can't speak as an expert. I wasn't. Judira, my colleague, was the New Harvest representative at that meeting, and then we had a couple of our fellows who were there as well, who were the ones working on the publication. So I am not an expert, but from what I have heard and my understanding about it, one of the big pieces actually revolves, which I think is the most interesting, revolves around the meaning of food for these communities. So specifically, we've worked a lot with communities in the northeast of the US or west, like the Pacific Northwest community, where salmon is a really important part of their culture. And it's not just that they really like eating salmon. It's actually part of their culture. Salmon have a value within their culture. They have a soul. All of those pieces are really important. And so when they came to the table in these conversations, one of the first questions was, well, your cultured salmon isn't going to have a soul. So what does that mean? Like, how is it salmon? And I'm paraphrasing from my understanding. This shouldn't be taken for exactly what they said, but I think in Western cultures, we don't think about the meanings of food that way. And so we have to kind of open our mind and think about how different cultures think of food and how this technology could influence that or impact that, both in positive and negative ways. We just have to kind of expand our thinking and listen to these other communities.
I think the direct way that it would impact them is through like a reduction of eutrophication. So then the waterways wouldn't be as affected, so the salmon would be more populous.
Yes, there absolutely could be positive impacts.
Yeah.
Some of that ends up revolving around policy decisions too, though, because we have to ensure that this technology does result in less eutrophication and also less fishing so that populations are higher. But then we also need to continue to protect the rights of these communities to be able to fish. So it's kind of an interesting, it's a complex problem. Like everything in this field, a lot of the claims that we make on sustainability or land use are going to involve both science, innovation, and policy to ensure that we get there.
Yeah, I would think, based on what I've read, which is limited, and then what you're saying, that the indigenous Americans wouldn't necessarily care for cell culture in that way for like food, for like their cultural benefit. I imagine that they'd be like more likely to stick with what they have since it fits like has like everything with it. Where like the cell egg's kind of like an argument, you have to like really make a compelling argument. But I do think that the one benefit of cell egg is this ability to like I don't know what the technical term for this is, but I call it like macronutrient in it. Like you can just like engineer them to have like so many different things in them. So one thing that happens after a disaster is even though like people are getting like food, they're usually malnourished the whole time because they're not getting like the variety of food, the nutrients and stuff. So that even though they're getting fed and they're alive, they're still struggling because of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is one of the really exciting things about this field is the ability to engineer foods to be more nutritious or healthier. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. What does a just transition look like to you? I whenever I hear terms like this, I don't know what they mean. And they sound nice and they're, oh, this is a dog. But what does a just transition? He showed up in the background. I got excited. But what does that look like? What's the future look like in your mind?
So just transition is such a loaded word, and we actually have tried to move away from using it a bit at New Harvest just because of how loaded it is. And it comes initially from the kind of energy field in the just transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And translating that into food is kind of a messy process. So in some ways it's good because it's a term people know, in other ways it's complicated. But I think what it means primarily is that we see a transition from, depends on the impact you're talking about. Well, let's say we're talking about sustainability, which is most typically used with food or with just transition. So transitioning away from foods that have a large climate impact to foods that have a better climate impact. And I think just transition looks at things such as the workforce that is currently employed by conventional agriculture. What does that transition look like for them? How do we ensure that we're not putting people out of work and affecting the livelihood of communities that rely on agriculture? It also looks at things like the indigenous communities, like ensuring that we're looking at the perspectives of all of these different players within the food system, and that we are seeing these new technologies not negatively impact any of them, and also not specifically positively impact any. So often with technology, it can really positively impact the most affluent in our society and not have those same impacts on the more disadvantaged communities. And so ensuring that those benefits are spread across the board. And I think to get there, we have to have these conversations with all these stakeholders. We need transparent innovation that is inclusive of all of these communities. And a lot of this comes back to the tenets of responsible research and innovation, which is why we recently changed all of our job titles to be directors of responsible research and innovation, is because that's kind of a framework that gets at a lot of these things rather than just a buzzword like just transition.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see the value of it. I guess in my mind, the specific, like for instance, like the ranching industry, I think they'll just be like what Japanese Wagyu beef would be. So instead of having like, I've been through Texas and just like herds of cows as far as the eye can see, I think it would just be like Wagyu beef where you could like focus on, specialty cows and like treat them really, really well. But what are the specifics of like that side of it? Like, how do you see it impacting the world?
It depends on who you talk to. I ascribe to a similar vision as you do. I don't see this field completely replacing traditional ways of growing food, but I see it as complementing it and also relieving the pressure from our food systems so that, as you said, the animals that we are still raising can be raised in the best way possible, and best way in terms of sustainable, ethical, and healthy. So yeah, I look at it as I want this field to help relieve the pressure on our food system so that we can grow food in any manner in the best way possible. So yeah, I agree. I think that conventional cattle ranching will probably continue and will just become a more premium product. There are some interesting ethical implications there if some communities can no longer afford conventionally raised foods. So it's a complex problem.
Yeah, I would imagine that that conventional, like people who rely on beef being a certain price, would no longer be able to afford that normally raised cow at that price.
Yeah, so we have to ask as a society, are we okay with that? Are we okay with essentially communities with lower income only being able to afford cultured meat? And again, this is assuming a future way off in which cultured meat is at a lower price point than farm raised meat. But I think these are interesting questions to think about.
Yeah, but it sounds like it'd be more like milk. I don't know if many people are familiar with this, but we overproduce milk in the U.S. and most of the time we actually end up dumping a lot of it. We did a lot under FDR's time as well, for different reasons. But today we overproduce milk and regulate the price and production of it, so that they can have like a certain level of consumption at a price that keeps the milk people in line. I mean, alive. So it seems like it would just be like that for any industry we're talking about. It would just be kind of like that for like average people. It either we regulate the pipe, or we like subsidize it in some way, like school lunches, for instance, which was a military benefit.
I didn't know that came from the military originally. Yeah, and I think this is where that policy piece comes in. And I'm certainly not a policy expert, but we do need to be looking at all of these pieces together.
Yeah. What type of expert? So we've heard a lot about what I keep like going down directions where you don't feel like an expert in. What are the areas that you are an expert in your mind?
Yeah, I know. I love that we're doing that, by the way. That's, again, part of why I love my job is because I don't just do the thing that I did my PhD in. I like it to touch all these different pieces, which is really fun. So my expertise specifically is in tissue engineering. So
Mhm.
that's this idea of taking cells, growing them in a laboratory or manufacturing facility into some sort of tissue. And I started my career in medicine. Which is honestly where most of the people in this field started, other than this first group of students that New Harvest funded that actually started their PhDs in cellular agriculture. But yeah, so I was culturing in my undergraduate degree. I was doing cartilage. In my graduate degree, I was doing heart muscle. So yeah, so I'm an expert in that, which itself is pretty multifaceted. So there you're kind of a biology expert. You have to understand the cell biology, the molecular biology, but you're also an engineer and that you have to be able to build these systems that grow the tissues and allow them to mature and all of those pieces. So yeah, so tissue engineering specifically. And luckily that's the same exact technology that's being used to grow meat. You just care about slightly different things. So in medicine, you care a lot about those tissues being able to function and being able to interface with the human body so that when you implant them, they continue to be alive and work within your system. Whereas with food, you care more about taste and texture and cost. So yeah, it's a really interesting application of what I was trained in to food.
Which is more difficult? Tissue engineering, meat, fat, or cartilage?
Ooh, interesting question. Um, are you talking in terms of food or in terms of medicine?
I meant medicine, but maybe I think food. It would go into a complex. I guess both go down the line of like it's not like them in isolation that's hard. It's like when you bring them together.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think they're all complex in their own ways. I do think muscle is especially complex because you have such a dynamic tissue, and that adds its own challenges. Whereas cartilage is a little bit more static, but also really challenging. To get into some interesting biology there, your cartilage is not well vascularized, and so it's really hard to get a new piece of tissue in there to stay alive. That was a lot of the work I was doing in my undergrad. And fat, I've actually never studied myself, so I can't talk too much about that. But I would guess that would be the easiest.
Hmm. Well, this leads to a larger question I have. There was another person at, I think you got your degree at Tufts, or I read wrong, or I have someone else in my head. But are you familiar with Michael Levin's work? I think he's at Tufts too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I never worked with him directly, but I was absolutely familiar with his work during my PhD, and then even now, it's super interesting the bioelectric work that he's doing.
Sweet. Yeah, I like. He was on the show, and I
Oh,
I wrote
cool.
down this question to ask you, and I was like, I like went off on like a little tangent trying to explain this. I was like, well, this makes it easier because you know what I'm talking about. So he talks about the anatomical compiler, bioelectric reprogramming, but a lot of the work you're doing, a lot of the work that's being done for cell agriculture or tissue engineering, I suppose. It seems like it's more like the micro scale, like we're engineering the cells to do X, Y, and Z, and then we scale it up in like vats or what have you. But Michael Levin's approach is more like they control like the electric field, ion channels, and stuff like that. So, is there a way to apply Michael Levin's work in cell agriculture?
Great question. We actually funded a student who was originally going to do that. She has since moved away doing that work. You might want to ask her. I'm not actually sure why, but I do think it's an incredibly interesting option. Because, like you said, you can kind of in theory, direct the development of these tissues on more of a macro scale rather than a micro scale. And so I think it's a really interesting idea. I personally don't know enough about it, but I definitely think there's an application there.
Yeah. Well, I just always wondered because like when you hear about it, like this ability to like regrow a limb, not from like rebuilding it like on the tissue level, just like kind of tricking your arm essentially and giving it the nutrients to regrow a limb, versus I think that's like kind of wild and how like he does it. It's like almost like science fiction. So I'm always curious.
Yeah,
Like,
it is really wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's still a lot to be learned about it. Last I checked in, we hadn't transferred that to a human limb. But it's definitely really interesting science.
He has a startup called Morphoceuticals because he loves I assume he just likes morpho space so much.
That's great. It's a great name.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he starts in mice and it's been going on for a little bit. But I think the debate of whether or not like BCI technology or his technology in terms of regrowing a limb and functionality, I'm always curious. I lean towards like more his stuff, even though like BCI is more easier to just like integrate a chip into your brain and like attach something, like have it controlled, or even like a muscle implant and stuff like that. But this isn't your avenue, so I won't ask you like a detailed question.
But it is super interesting.
Yeah. Is there are there avenues in cell agriculture that you think? Well, in this case, this is one that was being funded, but then it didn't continue. Are there other like outlier paths like this to explore that haven't been explored that you think should be explored?
I think absolutely. I think that in order to get the field, and this is a very general answer, but if we're going to get the field to where we want to at the cost and scale of production that we need, we're going to have to come out with outlier solutions that don't exist yet, because I think that's part of the challenge the field is going through right now is we are basing so much of the technology off of what we're pulling from medicine, and kind of what traditionally worked for the pharmaceutical industry or the medical tissue engineering industry. And the constraints are just so different. We kind of need to break out of that thinking and think outside the box. That being said, I don't know what those are. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think we're going to need some out of the box thinking to get where we want to go.
Yeah. Is it if you're having out of the box thinking, is there an aspect of New Harvest work that you think is going to get that out of the box thinking? Is it like funding the fellowship people to have the base of knowledge to start innovating in it? Like, how do you see us getting to that point?
Yeah, I think so. And that is one of the tenets of the fellowship, is to try to fund these out of the box ideas. Kind of the the scientific investigations that no one else is going to want to fund because they're too risky. That has always been a tenet of the New Harvest Fellowship. And we've had a few of those. Like I said, the start of the bioelectric one. We have another student, Freya, at the Technical University of Munich, who's doing a really interesting study on self-organization of cells. So, this idea that in order to get a marbled steak, it's really hard to get the muscle and the fat to all localized into that perfect marbling. So she's looking at some like really cutting edge technology that allows you to program the cells to self-organize into a structure. Really early stage research, really kind of like a cutting edge, risky endeavor. And so that's something we funded because if that could work, could be incredibly influential for the field.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. And she has a cool name. I like Old Norse names, Freya. So I'll have to put that in the show notes for other people to check out. Are there any books? Are there any books or resources that you recommend people check out? It doesn't have to be related to this field. It could just be things that you've been enjoying reading that you think I, for one, would enjoy reading because I need more books. Clearly.
Good question. What have I been reading lately? Well, I mean, there's lots of great books in this field, and I probably don't need to name those. Those are probably already pretty obvious. I have been reading a book called Patent Politics lately, which has been very interesting, kind of getting back to that discussion we had at the beginning of like IP and how that works. And it goes into how the US versus Europe has differed in their approach to patenting life forms, kind of as science has evolved into this ability to engineer life. How do you patent that? That's been really interesting. And again, part of my own personal journey and trying to better understand the kind of innovation side and open research and responsible research and innovation and how patents work and how that works with all those fields. So it's been a really interesting book. Pretty dense. It's kind of academically written, but really interesting, I think, to look at the politics between the US and Europe.
What is the difference between the way the US does it and Europe does it?
Well, I'm only halfway through the book, but I can tell you so far that the US has, I mean, as I think most people know, taking a much more open approach to kind of bioengineering. And so, much more open approach in the US and a much more, what's the best word for it? Kind of, I would say more thoughtful approach in Europe. I think some people might use a different adjective for that. But a big underlying piece of the two actually has been the introduction of a morality question in Europe. So when they look at the patenting of technologies in Europe, they're actually looking at the moral questions underlying it. And they use a framework, I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's a Latin term, but essentially translates to like public, I can't think of what it is now, but like, how is this going to impact the public? Whereas in the US, they completely rule out any question of morality in patenting, and they look at it as a completely impartial, all we're going to do is check XYZ. Is it novel? Does it fall into the requirements for a patent? Okay, you can have a patent, and let that kind of moral question or the regulation of technology be done in general by the economy. So it's just kind of two different ways of doing it. It's quite interesting.
That is interesting. Is there, do you have a favorite flavor? The US or Europe?
I'm going to out myself here. I tend to subscribe more to the European approach, honestly. It's not purely black and white, but I do think we should take the morality question into consideration in innovation, because innovation is not impartial. I think a lot of people like to look at innovation as being completely independent of society, and we should just innovate, and innovation is always good. I think innovation is embedded in everything we do and is highly influenced by society and influences society. And so I think we have to look at that morality question when we're innovating. Which actually another book I recently read was The Ethics of Innovation, and that one was interesting too. In kind of talking about this question of, is innovation always good? So I subscribe more to the European approach on that, but not in everything. I mean, I think both have some benefits.
Yeah. I'm trying to think which one I would go for. I think my big concern with the European approach is like morals are somewhat relative. I'm not even somewhat, they're like extremely relative, like very cultural. Yeah. If you take someone from Europe a random person, you took someone from like Southeast Asia or China, and you sat them in a room and said, "Hey, what's moral?" I think they'd all have different answers to that.
A really, really good point.
Yeah. So then, how would you account for that? How does Europe account for that?
I don't know. I think I have to finish the book.
Yeah, I think so. That's the last third. I think probably.
Yes, probably.
Yeah. I don't know. Morals are weird. Western Civ and whatnot. So, one last citation from you, actually, and then we're gonna go to like a new thing that I've never done before, which is a thing from Reddit. But oftentimes when I grab my oat milk out of the fridge, I find myself thinking fondly about when I'll be able to grab true milk that doesn't make me feel bad. And so I just want to ask, for people who love milk, oat milk, why don't you think oat milk is real milk? True milk?
Good question. Oh man, you have to be careful of everything you let yourself be quoted on. While I do love oat milk, and I do think it should be called milk, in some instances it doesn't quite have the taste or functionality of cow's milk, which would have been a better phrasing to use rather than real milk. Cow's milk would have been the better phrasing. And I am quite excited for when we can have cow's milk that is made using precision fermentation.
Okay, that's good to know. At the same time, it's not. Is it cow's milk if it doesn't come from a cow? I guess it comes from a cow, like laterally. So it's kind of not.
Great
even
question.
that's not.
I mean,
that's not. Yeah, it's kind of like almost like a thesis of shit problem, because you replaced all. But you took everything but like one like board or something, and then like that's the ship now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. No, I think that's a great question. And I mean, I'm asked all the time, are these products going to be vegan? Or are they going to be halal or kosher? And I can't answer any of the religious ones. There's religious scholars working on those. But from the vegan perspective, I think it comes down to, why are you vegan? Because it is, from a biology perspective, molecular biology perspective, cow's milk. Like, it was the genetic material of cow's milk. It has the same structure and function as cow's milk, but it didn't come from a cow. So I think it comes back to that morality question of, if veganism or vegetarianism is going to become a lot more nuanced, because you're going to have options on the market that don't fit into those categories perfectly. And so every single person's going to have to ask themselves individually of, well, why was I vegan? Does this fit those morals? And make their own choices.
That's interesting. But alrighty, so I think I sent it in the chat. So if you want to like pull it up. So for people listening in, I read these things where basically there's like a subreddit. If it's not in the chat, I can send it to you again. But where people basically say like, hey, something happened, and they ask people to like weigh in. Are they jerks or they not jerks? It's called "Am I the Asshole?" But I don't know if like swearing matters to you at all, Bre. So I'm like avoiding that word. And so like I can read this, or we can take turns reading this, and then I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are. I haven't read it fully. I just know it involves meat, and I thought it would be funny. That's like my criterion for this. So do you have it before you? And I'll throw this up on the screen for everyone else.
I don't see it yet. And okay. I was trying to find it, so you're gonna have to tell me again. We're gonna read it, and then what are we going to do?
I just want to hear your thoughts on it. We'll talk about it.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Found it.
There you go. Okay. So man, I suck reading out loud. I wish we would take turns. But anyway, so the title is, "Am I the Asshole for ordering a giant steak against my mother-in-law's will, actually eating it, and refusing to cover the entire bill?" So I am 27, have been together with my husband, Nate, for over 10 years, married for 4. I don't have the best relationship with my mother-in-law, as she seems to police what I eat. That's kind of mean in the first place, but everyone in my family has. And whatever, if you have a thought, just like say it as you're going, like as we're reading it together. And anyone in the comment section, tell me what you think about this. It's just like, I do this a lot with my friends, so I thought like, why not do it to Bre? So everyone in my family has a fast metabolism. I have been working with horses, so due to this, a lot of calories, taken about 2,000 to 3,000 a day. Usually have rather large meals to get the energy back, and I still remain skinny. So we got horses right there, legacy stuff going on. New to the event, I think like cell agriculture seems to, like, I think that's what they're gonna do for beef and all these other things, like what having horses, like they just constrict down and become specialty items. But all right, so anyways, yeah. So now to the event. My in-laws invited me and Nate for dinner last Friday. I was very busy back then and haven't eaten since about 6, 7 a.m. and also didn't have a chance to have a snack before heading to the restaurant, so I was starving. I usually have something to eat before seeing my mother-in-law to avoid her comments. Due to this, I have ordered a large steak at the restaurant, which is meant for 2 people. Wow, that's cool. It also that cool is not the person. It also came with prawns, bacon, and 2 sides. Man, I love this woman. Like, I want to eat that. Please note, it was not the most expensive item on the menu, as some of what my in-laws had significantly higher price dishes. We were all splitting the bill. Anyway, my mother-in-law started making comments how I shouldn't be ordering that. I can't eat since even her husband wouldn't be able to finish the dish, let alone someone my size. I smiled and said, I haven't eaten since early this morning. I'm starving. I didn't finish the steak. If I don't finish the steak, I'll have it for leftovers. I have easily finished the steak and was waiting for dessert when my mother-in-law flipped. She said, I am attention seeking and was putting on a show. I also said I have made my father-in-law and brother-in-law feel uneasy and that a woman shouldn't eat that much. Wow, there's so many things here for us to unpack.
Goodness, yes.
I didn't think we were going to get into sexism, but so it is unhealthy and something is wrong with me.
We're going to touch everything in this podcast episode.
Yeah, we're getting it all. So she has then demanded me and Nate to cover the entire bill as she wasn't planning on such a big expenditure. Said we were absolutely not covering the entire bill since it wasn't meant to be split equally. Reminded her the dishes ordered, they were significantly more expensive compared to my steak, including her starter. As a result, I was called an asshole who ruined a family dinner. Nate is on my side, but most of my in-laws are making very passive-aggressive posts on social media about it and keep sending me different articles on what might cause excessive eating. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, my goodness. There is a lot there.
Yes.
The first part reminds me a lot of my husband, who will eat a lot. It's ridiculous and still remain skinny. So, I mean, we've definitely dealt with this problem, but typically it's like his is the most expensive meal on the bill. So if it's not, I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah. I don't it seems like the core issue seems to be like the mother-in-law has a view on like how women should look and eat and is like imposing it on the daughter-in-law.
Yeah, the core issue seems to be the relationship between this woman and her mother-in-law. So seems like that's the core issue to be addressed here.
Yeah.
I'm quite lucky and I am incredibly close to my mother-in-law. So I can't give advice on that.
Yeah. So you wouldn't yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, other than I think their strategy of typically trying to eat snacks before heading to meals with their mother-in-law seems like a good strategy. But, you can't be perfect.
Yeah. Or they could, I guess, pay differently. It seems like the strategy you would suggest is if the person in this post continue doing like they know what's going to happen. They're like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And so they should just, kind of account for it and move on with their day versus letting this person. I guess my problem with that is that like the mom is just like clearly attacking her like significantly over the years about how she eats and how, what she does, and it seems like it's kind of obnoxious. I guess like if someone was like, if I just like followed you around like, why are you eating that? At a certain point, I feel like he'd bot me, but like the mother-in-law gets a pass because like you're married to them, you have to be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the best option would be to try to have a conversation with your mother-in-law, try to get at the root of whatever this issue is. I don't know the backstory though, and whether that's possible.
Yeah.
But that does seem we may need some group therapy with the family here.
Yeah. Well, she has the horses for equine therapy, so that is I think an option here. I think you have to have specially trained. You can have specially trained horses though. Is this so? I have heard that. So I'm not dating. I'm married, but I know people who are out there who are dating and who are women, and they say they do feel normally judged when they're eating. And granted, I'm talking to someone who's married as well, so I don't know. Like channel your inner person.
I'm not only married, but the last time I dated, I was 15. My husband and I were high school sweethearts. So that's
so dorky. I love it.
No, but I know, so dorky. Just kept working, and here we are, 30 and still together. Yeah, so I really can't give advice on the dating piece, but I do think, I mean, to get to gender stereotypes, I mean, they certainly exist, and even within like generations, I think there's a lot of stereotypes there that can be really challenging. And yeah, I think you always have to think about, is it worth putting up a fight? And if it was your mother-in-law, probably would be worth trying to have that conversation, is my guess.
Yeah. I like my mother-in-law to have benign neglect when it comes to me. That's my goal. Like, love me or hate me, if I can just I just seek for benign neglect. Like, I'm just like a plant. I'm happy being a plant. I'll just give oxygen for my environment and treat their daughter nice and go about my day. So do you think the lady in this equation, the daughter-in-law, is the jerk or is it the mom?
Oh, I would say it's the mom.
The mom.
You always have to realize history is written by a biased perspective, but from this perspective, sure seems like it.
Yeah. I think I would agree. I don't know. I think to the level that like the mom's just like going about it. Like I don't know. It's kind of excessive. I feel like I mean honestly, like eating that much food in one sitting, I would like applaud her. I'd be like, good for you. This is
And if
amazing.
you're still thin, that sounds amazing.
Even
I
if you're
think
not
most
thin,
people wish for that. There could be some jealousy involved.
Yeah, that could be it.
I think we'd all wish
Wow.
we could eat that much and still be thin.
Yeah. Is there I don't know if this is like too personal, but are there any tips for having a mother-in-law that you? I mean, you have a good relationship, so like anyone out there, there's a lot of these about evil mother-in-laws essentially. So like, is there any like tips to like having an? I guess like getting in early at 15 and like just never going away. I think they've like kind of like 15 years of time. I think kind of like molds people down a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's two factors to my relationship with my mother-in-law. One was the being so young, and hilariously, when we were in high school and dating, I'd go over to his house and he wanted to go upstairs and watch TV and didn't want to hang out with his family. And I insisted on hanging out with his family. So I think that's part of how I became so close to them. And she also is quite young. The age difference between her and her son is a lot smaller than typical. And so I think there's less of a generational gap, which is really nice too. So shout out to Heather. You're great.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like she's great. So she's like a millennial too then.
Yeah.
It's weird that millennials
I think
can be
helps a
like,
lot to be able to relate to your mother-in-law. So
yeah. I was recently talking to a 15-year-old and they were using all these different words. And then I realized they were using our words from when we were kids. And they were like passing it off. They took the word and they tweaked it just a little bit. And I was like, that's our word. And
so it's coming around.
Yeah. Well, they're like, did you know about Eminem or something? Like just kept asking me all these questions like, oh, this is a new thing that's out. Like the Eminem's new song. It's like, I was like, that's been around for like 20 years. Like, what are you talking about?
So my husband's youngest sister is a sophomore in college. She's a lot younger than us. And so I always feel really old when I talk to her. Typically she's saying things and I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. But she was saying that the music that they're playing at parties now is like the music from our era. She said like the go-to crazy dance song at the frats at her university right now is Mr. Brightside. I couldn't believe that.
What? Which one is Mr. Brightside? Is there like a lyric you remember it? I don't remember names of things. I have like Taylor Swift in my head. My wife will not stop listening to Taylor Swift. So if you told me like, oh, it's this song of this era, I'd be like, I could probably know that. But I do not know the song you're mentioning, I think.
Well, it's by the Killers. Mr. Brightside with Killers. Here.
No.
If you're gonna have to look it up. I won't sing it for you, sorry.
Okay, that's what I was seeking for, and I would put that in the clip, and people were like, this is gonna be a wild episode. All right, so then we've established this person's the jerk. You know how to have a good relationship, make an effort with people, which is nice. And I would ask you advice on finding love and stuff, but apparently the advice is, I don't know. Imagine you guys met in biology class, and you were like Edward, and he was Edward, and you were like the Kirsten Stewart character, and he just didn't sparkle when he came onto the sun. I don't know. That's how I imagine you guys met.
How you imagine it? It was AP psychology, but pretty close.
That's pretty close. It's still science. Psychology is still science, but
yeah.
All right then. Well, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. We just tried something new there, so I don't know. Everyone listening, you can make fun of me, but Bre, thanks so much for coming today, talking about cellular culture, the transitions that's going on, new harvests, and the value they bring, and helping us decide who's the asshole in this thing.
Happy to try any experiment with you. This was fun.